At every Carter family dinner, I learned how to disappear without ever leaving the room. Maybe it was the way the silverware seemed to sparkle just a little brighter when I didn't speak, or the way my chair, always at the far end of the mahogany table, felt a few inches colder than everyone else's. Tonight was no exception. Late autumn in Boston brought a brisk chill, but inside the Carter estate, everything was perfectly curated for comfort. The fire in the living room, the subtle scent of roast chicken and clams, classical music humming from speakers tucked behind old family portraits. Yet, as I glanced around the table, I felt like an observer in my own family's play. My father, Richard, was holding court at his usual spot at the head of the table, his posture as straight as the pressed lines on his dress shirt. He looked every bit the accomplished attorney, gray at the temples, a touch of Harvard red still lingering in his tie. Mom, Margaret, always refined, wore a string of pearls and a polite smile, her attention drifting back and forth between Andrew and Lauren, occasionally stopping on me as if to remind herself that I was still present. Andrew, my older brother, had just wrapped up his latest campaign in city politics, and the pride in Dad's eyes was unmistakable. Lauren, my sister, was home from D.C. with a new job in communications, her voice now trained for interviews and press briefings. Everyone wore muted, expensive-looking clothes. I wore my favorite gray sweater, soft from years of use, the sleeves just a touch too long. As dinner began, Dad raised his glass. To Andrew, Boston's youngest city councilman. He grinned, and we all toasted, the crystal catching the light. And to Lauren, who's making waves in Washington. We couldn't be prouder. Mom reached over and adjusted Lauren's scarf, a small gesture that felt like a benediction. Andrew's plate was piled high with clam chowder, his favorite. Lauren's eyes sparkled as she described her boss's latest television appearance. I let their words wash over me, focusing on the steam rising from my own bowl. Every so often, my phone would buzz quietly in my lap. I ignored it. Family dinners were sacred in our house, even if I never quite felt like I belonged. I learned early that if you don't want to be a disappointment, it's best not to make waves. Midway through the meal, Dad glanced my way. And Olivia? His voice was light, almost teasing. Still figuring things out, right? He chuckled, and the rest of the table followed, even Aunt Clara, whose laugh echoed from the iPad at the far end of the table, FaceTime lag making her a second late to every joke. I mustered a small smile, nodded, and murmured, "That's right, Dad." If anyone noticed my discomfort, they didn't say. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when I thought I could earn my place at the table, maybe by collecting achievements the way Andrew and Lauren did. But over the years, it became clear that the Carter family had a template, one I never quite fit. I was the youngest, the one who took apart the toaster for fun, the one who coded her way through high school but never cared much for debate team or student council. As the conversation drifted to old family stories, Dad recounting his first big case, Mom reminiscing about her debutante ball, I felt my mind slip away to another memory. MIT graduation. I could still see the sea of black caps, the raucous cheers bouncing off the arena walls. But when I looked up to where my family should have been, just an empty row, stark and silent amid the celebration. Mom had texted me that morning, "So proud of you, sweetheart. We'll celebrate soon." She'd included a photo of her dress for a luncheon across town. No hugs, no applause. I'd tried to shake it off, after all, not every family can be there for every milestone. But deep down, something in me shifted. Tonight, that old ache resurfaced, gentle but insistent. I sipped my water, nodding as Andrew described his new initiative for city parks, Lauren chiming in with ideas for media outreach. Dad topped off Andrew's wine, Mom reached for the breadbasket just as Lauren did, and they laughed softly at their matching manners. I found myself envying how natural it all seemed for them. Every so often, Aunt Clara interjected from her digital window. "Liv, how's the big city treating you?" she asked, her tone genuinely warm. Before I could answer, Mom jumped in. "Oh, Olivia's working in tech, you know. Not sure exactly what, but she keeps busy." Clara winked at me, but the moment passed as quickly as it came. As dessert was served, a perfect apple tart, golden and neat, I realized no one had asked what I actually did. Not really. I had learned to stop volunteering details. It always led to polite nods and quick changes of subject. So I let it be, focusing instead on the rhythm of fork and knife, the soft glow of the chandelier. But even as I sat quietly, I could feel something inside me refusing to shrink. If my family didn't have room for my story, I would make space for it somewhere else. There's a kind of freedom in realizing that, even if it stings. People talk about legacy as if it's handed down in wine glasses and last names. Maybe sometimes it's built in silence, one small act of courage at a time. After the dishes were cleared and the conversation turned to plans for Thanksgiving, I excused myself, stepping into the cool hallway. My phone buzzed again, persistent. It was a LinkedIn notification, a recruiter reaching out about a logistics position at a small company outside Columbus. Logistics. The word made me smile, if only because I knew how little it would impress anyone in the dining room behind me. But standing there, away from the noise and the polished family script, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to start something on my own terms, far from Boston, far from the Carter estate. The night air seeping through the old windows felt sharp and fresh, like possibility. Somewhere behind me, I heard laughter, the safe, easy kind that comes from being perfectly understood. I didn't have that here, but I had something else, a quiet resolve. As I looked down at my phone, a single thought settled in my chest. Maybe it was time to build a legacy no one could ignore, even if I had to start out invisible. Most people start their careers with pride. I started mine like a secret. It was the winter of 2016, and I'd left Boston behind for a warehouse job in Columbus, Ohio, a place where the sky seemed to press down, gray and endless, and the only thing sharper than the wind was the fluorescent warehouse lighting. I rented a small apartment near the river, the kind with old radiator pipes and a view of parking lots dusted with snow. To my family, I simply said I was working in supply chain management. That was about as exciting as telling them I'd become a traffic light. The warehouse itself was a behemoth of concrete and steel, humming with forklifts and echoing footsteps. Mr. Benson, the warehouse manager, greeted me on my first day with a clipboard and a handshake that threatened to break every bone in my hand. "You from the East Coast?" he asked, squinting at my resume. When I nodded, he just grunted. "Hope you like cold pizza and colder mornings." His beard looked as though it had been carved out of granite, and he had a habit of barking orders into the air, never sure who might be listening. I was hired as an entry-level logistics analyst, which meant I spent my days hunched over a second-hand computer, routing shipments and tracking pallets. The screens flickered with maps and spreadsheets, the kind of endless data I'd always found comfort in. But it didn't take long to realize the system had holes. Drivers complained about wasted hours stuck on closed highways. Orders were misrouted to the wrong docks, and inventory sheets rarely matched what was actually stacked in the shadowy aisles. No one seemed surprised, least of all Mr. Benson. During breaks, I retreated to a quiet corner with my battered college notebook. Its pages were crowded with flowcharts, sketches, and half-formed algorithms, remnants of late nights at MIT, when building a solution was more important than sleeping. I'd scribble new delivery routes, circle trouble spots, jot down code ideas that might make the chaos more predictable. Most days, these notes stayed between me and the margins, another secret in a place built on routines and resignation. Then there was Alicia Thompson. She was an intern from Cincinnati, sharp-witted, direct, with a laugh that cut through warehouse noise like a cymbal. We bonded over our mutual sense of not belonging and our shared addiction to bad vending machine coffee. Our friendship started with a joke about barcode scanners. Why do they always beep twice for me? Is that warehouse Morse code? But soon we were swapping stories about everything: failed science fair projects, family quirks, and the feeling of always being a few steps out of sync with the world. Most evenings, we stayed late, hacking away at spreadsheets and eating cold pizza from the break room. The radio played 80s hits, a strange comfort. Sometimes we'd code little side projects, just to keep our brains moving. One night, as snow piled up outside, Alicia leaned back in her chair and said, "You ever feel like everyone else got a script, and we missed rehearsal?" I laughed, but deep down, I knew she was right. There's a quiet loneliness in being the one who asks too many questions, who sketches out alternate paths on napkins and never quite fits the template. That winter, a blizzard hit central Ohio. Trucks were backed up for miles on I-70, shipments delayed by days. Inside the warehouse, drivers paced the loading docks, cursing the weather, cursing dispatch, cursing fate. I watched as order after order was marked late, the red text on my monitor blinking like a warning. A local hospital's critical supplies got stuck in a snowbank 2 towns over. Mr. Benson shrugged, "Not much we can do. Weather's weather." But I felt something sharp and personal, like failure settling in my bones. After my shift, I stayed behind, poring over the night's chaos. I pulled out my notebook and started mapping weather patterns, historical delays, alternate routes, all the variables the current system ignored. A new idea took root: what if you could predict these disruptions, reroute shipments before they ever hit trouble? I filled page after page with sketches and pseudocode, the beginnings of a tool that might save more than just numbers on a sheet. The next day, I tried sharing my thoughts with Mr. Benson. I showed him a few charts, suggested tweaking delivery schedules based on storm forecasts. He frowned, arms crossed. "Olivia, you're here to follow the process, not reinvent the wheel. Don't overthink it. Keep your head down, learn the ropes. You start chasing every little blip, you'll lose sight of what matters." His words stung, and for a moment I wondered if he was right. But the feeling in my gut said otherwise. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by open notebooks and the soft static of snow hitting the window, my phone buzzed. A text from Alicia: "Saw your notebook today. Let's build something better." "I'm in." I smiled into the blue glow of the screen. Maybe we didn't have the Carter family playbook, but together we had curiosity, grit, and enough stubborn hope to fill a warehouse. As the warehouse radio played another synth-heavy anthem and snow fell in swirling sheets outside, I realized that sometimes the roads less celebrated are the ones that actually get you somewhere new. All you need is one person willing to walk it with you, and the courage to take that first step. Thanksgiving at the Carter house always felt more like an interview than a reunion. Maybe it was the way my father's questions came dressed up as compliments, or how the living room fire seemed to burn just a little brighter for everyone but me. Even the house itself, stately, all brick and white columns, seemed to lean toward Andrew and Lauren, as if eager to bask in their success. I carried my overnight bag up the familiar walkway, pie dish balanced in one hand, a tiny box in the other, a little something for Mom, just to try and bridge the distance. The foyer was decked in autumn garlands, and the air smelled of pumpkin pie and cinnamon. Family photos lined the staircase: Andrew in his councilman's sash, Lauren at a ribbon cutting, Mom and Dad in tux and gown at some gala. My own photos were there, too, though usually tucked at the edge, me holding a science fair ribbon, or posing with my laptop at a blurry college event. I tried not to look for them, but it was habit, like searching for your reflection in a shop window and finding only a shadow. Inside, the voices of my family rose and fell in cheerful waves. Andrew was holding court, describing a new city project he was leading. Lauren, dressed in crisp navy, added details about her boss's trip to the capital. Dad beamed at them both, pride rolling off him in steady, practiced waves. I slipped my pie into the kitchen, where Mom was adjusting silverware and checking the turkey's browning. She hugged me quickly, then turned to review the side dishes. "Olivia, be a dear and bring out the cranberry sauce?" I nodded, glad for the task. Dinner began with the usual round of updates. Aunt Clara, resplendent in a peacock-colored scarf, chimed in with news of her art show. My uncle told a long, winding story about his fishing trip, then grinned at me. "You still deliver things, Liv?" The table laughed, not unkindly, but with the knowing air of people comfortable in their roles. I smiled back. "Actually, I've been working on a logistics project, kind of a route planner for local businesses." Dad nodded, polite but distracted. "That's nice. These days, everything runs on apps." The conversation swerved back to Andrew's new committee appointment and Lauren's plans to travel to D.C. for a policy summit. I ate in silence, the taste of sweet potato dull against the salt of being overlooked. Even Aunt Clara, usually my ally, was deep in conversation about her next mural. The room was warm, and the fire crackled in the background, but the air between us felt brittle, thin as ice. I noticed little details, the way Mom smoothed the tablecloth every time Lauren spoke, or how Dad poured an extra splash of wine for Andrew. On the sideboard, the family's old trophies gleamed, Andrew's debate medals, Lauren's leadership plaques, even Mom's tennis awards. My college mug, battered and faded, peeked out from behind a bowl of fruit. After dessert, I retreated to the den, phone in hand. Alicia's name flashed across the screen. I texted her a quick update, survived another round of the Carter Olympics. "No medals for me." She replied instantly, "Want some good news? Food bank demo worked. Your algorithm shaved 30 minutes off delivery time. Real people got their meals tonight." A picture came through, volunteers smiling, boxes stacked high, a handwritten thank you, taped to a wall. My chest swelled with a private pride I couldn't share at the dinner table. I scrolled back through my college notebook, remembering the flower shop project. Mrs. Reed had let me build a custom app for her, a simple thing that mapped out delivery routes for bouquets. She paid me in muffins and wildflowers. I thought of her now, and of how little it would matter to my family that my code was making someone's day easier, even if it was only a handful of bouquets or a few hot meals. Back in the dining room, as coffee was poured and pie was served, Mom sat beside me and lowered her voice. "Olivia, have you thought about something a little more visible for your career? Maybe grad school, or something in management?" Her tone was gentle, but the message was clear: what I was doing didn't count, not here, not really. I nodded and said I'd think about it, even though I knew my path was already drawing itself in the margins, far from the Carter family script. Sometimes the hardest part about distance isn't miles, it's not being seen, even when you're sitting right at the table. As the night wound down, I helped clear the plates, watching my family from across the kitchen. They looked so comfortable, so sure of their place in the world. I envied that certainty, even as I realized I might never have it, not their way. When I stepped outside into the chill, my phone vibrated again. An email, subject line, "Congratulations." From a local nonprofit. They wanted to pilot my software for their holiday distribution run. It was my first yes, and it didn't come with applause or a family toast. Instead, it came with a quiet satisfaction, the sense that maybe my work mattered somewhere, even if no one at home noticed. Standing on the porch, I looked back at the Carter house, lights twinkling in every window, laughter drifting out into the night. For the first time, I let myself hope that approval didn't have to come from within those walls. Sometimes, it comes from the places, and the people, who need you most. And as I tucked my phone into my pocket, I realized, the distance between me and my family wasn't always a gap to be closed. Sometimes, it was just the space I needed to grow. While my family debated which Ivy League names would look best on the Christmas cards, I was learning to code in the warehouse break room. That spring, Boston was a patchwork of melting snow and new beginnings, the kind of air that made you believe anything was possible if you just kept moving. My possible came in the form of a rented storage unit turned makeshift office, a cement box off a side street, with a crooked mailbox and a view of dumpsters and traffic cones. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every morning, I hauled in a second-hand laptop, a thermos of black coffee, and a battered MIT mug that made me feel both proud and like I had something to prove. The desk wobbled and the paint peeled, but I strung up fairy lights along the ceiling pipes and taped algorithms to the wall. Some nights, the hum of the city crept through the cracked window, horns and sirens and the distant clatter of the tea, reminding me that the world was much bigger, and noisier, than any Carter family dinner table. Most nights, Alicia was there, her hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes sharp behind thick-rimmed glasses. Devin and Maya, two friends from the coding community, squeezed in beside us, laptops open, energy drinks scattered across cardboard desks we'd rescued from the alley. There was a strange comfort in the clatter of keys and the glow of code running at midnight, a sense of belonging I'd never quite found at home. Late nights became the rule, not the exception. We wrote code until our fingers cramped, troubleshot endless bugs, and watched our tiny project eat through server space we could barely afford. I lived off ramen and cheap takeout, with Alicia always good for a teen dinner of discount pizza or whatever snacks she'd scored from the corner bodega. My family, of course, had no idea what I was building. In their world, success came with headlines, not headaches. Sometimes, when exhaustion got the better of me, I remembered the feel of metal and wires in my hands as a child, taking apart the family toaster just to see how it worked. Dad hadn't been happy about it, but I'd reassembled it better than before, or at least that's how I remember it. Back then, nobody called me a distraction. I was just a kid with questions. Now, the questions were bigger, and the stakes were real. Our first pilot project came together almost by accident. Mrs. Reed, the flower shop owner who'd given me my first coding job in exchange for muffins and wildflowers, agreed to let us test the app for her delivery routes. I remember the thrill of seeing her van take the most efficient path through the city, shaving precious minutes off each stop. Word spread, a couple of neighborhood businesses wanted in, too. For a moment, it felt like we were building more than code, we were building momentum. But the victories were small, and the bills came fast. We pooled our savings for another month of server time, skipped outings, and juggled day jobs to stay afloat. Alicia was always there to catch me when my resolve started to slip. "You built this from nothing," she'd remind me, pressing a muffin from Mrs. Reed into my hand. "Don't let some faceless spreadsheet tell you what's possible." One rainy afternoon, Mrs. Reed stopped by the storage unit, arms full of fresh muffins and a smile that could soften concrete. "You kids are changing my world, you know that," she said, peeking at our wall of printouts. "I used to worry every bouquet would wilt before it found a home. Now, my drivers get home before dinner." She pressed a paper bag into my hands, a thank you written in flour and cinnamon. Moments like that made the long hours worth it. Still, the rest of Boston kept moving, and it seemed every tech headline featured someone else's overnight success. When we finally landed a meeting with a local angel investor, I barely slept the night before, rehearsing my pitch in front of the cracked mirror in the storage unit bathroom. I wore my only blazer, patched at the elbow, and made the case for predictive logistics, real results, real people, real potential. The investor listened, nodded, even smiled a few times. Then he leaned back in his leather chair and said, "Cute, but niche. Logistics isn't sexy. Maybe try a food app next time." He handed me his card, more out of politeness than hope. The words stung, sharp as ice, but I kept my head high, thanked him for his time, and left with Alicia's hand squeezing my shoulder in silent support. That night, back in the office, the string lights seemed dimmer, the city noise less like opportunity and more like doubt pressing in. Devin and Maya packed up early, offering encouragement. Alicia stayed behind, tapping away at her keyboard, trying to cheer me up with old warehouse jokes and stories about failed science fairs. I sipped cold coffee from my MIT mug, staring at lines of code that felt suddenly fragile. As midnight slipped past, my laptop chimed, a new email, subject, "Let's talk tomorrow." It was from an angel investor I'd never met, someone who'd heard about our pilot from Mrs. Reed. They wanted to meet, first thing in the morning, to talk about changing the way Boston moves. I blinked at the screen, heart pounding. After weeks of shadows, maybe there was a crack of light after all. I glanced around the cramped little room, cardboard desks and cables, the scent of cinnamon and burnt coffee lingering in the air. This wasn't the story my family would brag about over dinner, but it was mine, a story built in the spaces no one else thought to look. And as I packed up for the night, hope buzzed in my veins, soft but insistent. Maybe every legacy starts in the shadows, but it doesn't have to stay there forever. No one notices the tide turning, until the boats move. I thought about that as I sat in our startup's new office, a real one, with actual windows and a working coffee machine, not just a drafty storage unit full of string lights and hope. Summer 2019 had arrived in Boston, humid and bright, and for the first time in years, my world felt a little bit bigger than the Carter family's old estate. The past few months had been a blur of code, meetings, and carefully measured risk. Then Mr. Goldstein, the angel investor from the "Let's Talk Tomorrow" email, showed up at our tiny office with a smile and a check. His words still rang in my ears, "The real world doesn't run on flashy ideas. It runs on people who see where things break and fix them." His money let us pay ourselves a real salary. For once, Alicia didn't have to stress about rent, and I bought groceries without calculating the price of every tomato. Even better, our project made the news. Not the front page, but enough to count. A tech blog did a story about women in logistics, featuring a blurry picture of me and Alicia high-fiving in front of a whiteboard. The article called our work innovative and disruptive, and the words made me feel taller, like I was stepping into the light after years of watching from the shadows. Devin sent the link to his mom. Maya's little sister taped the printout to her locker. I saved the article, planning to mention it the next time I visited home. Brunch at the Carter house was a well-oiled tradition: bagels, fruit salad, lox, and black coffee, everything just so. Mom set the table with her favorite blue and white china. Dad insisted on making fresh squeezed orange juice, as if we needed another symbol of effort. Lauren wore a blazer over her t-shirt and had her hair pulled back, ready for some imagined TV interview. I brought a tin of pastries from a bakery near my office and wondered if anyone would notice they were made with real butter. After a few bites and a dozen family updates, Andrew was on a conference call from out of state, so it was just the four of us. Mom asked what was new at the office. I started to tell them about the article and the new pilot program with a medical supply distributor. Dad nodded politely, then checked his watch. Lauren offered a tight smile and said, "That's great, Liv. But are you getting any traction?" In communications, you really have to brand yourself. Maybe get a better website, a sharper logo? People won't take you seriously if you don't look the part. I bit into my bagel to hide my disappointment. I wanted to say, it's not the logo that gets boxes to hospitals on time, but I held my tongue. I remembered what Mom always said, stability is the key to respect. That was the Carter family's gospel. Lauren, meanwhile, described her boss's recent press conference, the rush of prepping talking points and fielding reporters' questions. She looked like she owned the place, Lauren said. That's what you want. Command the room. I tried to explain that our product had actually improved delivery times for a handful of Boston hospitals, but the conversation drifted. Dad asked how long it would be before we were profitable. You're not taking out loans, are you? He asked, voice sharp around the edges. This startup thing, it's exciting, but until you're profitable, it's all just a phase, Liv. A distraction. I know you work hard, but stability matters. Respect comes with stability. His words stung more than I wanted to admit. I looked at the old kitchen clock, ticking steadily, and thought of all the hours I'd spent building something from nothing. Sometimes, the things we build are invisible, until they aren't. As brunch wound down, Lauren reached across the table, her hand light on my wrist. Liv, there's a regional healthcare conference coming up next month. I bet they'd love to hear about your project. I can put you in touch with the organizers, just say the word. I felt a jolt of panic at the idea of speaking in public, but a part of me also recognized the opportunity. My throat tightened, but I managed a nod. Maybe I'll do that. After everyone left the table, I gathered plates and watched my family from the kitchen doorway. Mom fussed over the tablecloth, Dad scrolled through emails, Lauren rehearsed something in her head, lips moving silently. I wondered if they'd remember this brunch as anything but another Carter ritual. For them, the tide had never shifted. For me, the ground felt different beneath my feet. When I got back to the office, Alicia greeted me with a grin. Guess who got invited to speak at the regional healthcare conference? She waggled her phone, the email opened for me to read. My stomach twisted with nerves, but my heart soared. Maybe, just maybe, this was how the tide started to turn, not with a dramatic wave, but with one boat finally moving in a new direction. I lingered in the office that afternoon, watching sunlight filter through the dusty windows, the quiet hum of computers and distant city sounds anchoring me. There was still so much work to do, code to write, contracts to review, 1,000 fears to face, but for the first time, I felt the subtle current of change. I let myself believe, for a moment, that the boats were finally moving. And I was one of them. The conference stage was smaller than the Carter dining room, but the audience actually listened. I stood at the edge of the makeshift platform, hands curled around the remote for my slides, heart pounding so loudly I was sure the front row could hear. It was December 2020, snow swirling outside the windows of the Boston Marriott, the city muffled in quiet white. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with hospital directors, logistics managers, and startup founders, everyone with a badge swinging from their neck. I spotted Alicia and Maya near the back, giving me matching thumbs up. Devin was fussing with the projector, making sure everything would run smoothly. Mr. Goldstein was there too, leaning back with the satisfaction of someone whose bet was finally paying off. In the corner of my mind, I heard a much younger version of myself reading out a childhood Christmas list, block letters spelling out, "Build something important." I took a breath and started my demo, walking the room through our software's impact on delivery times, live reroutes, and real results for local hospitals. There were nods, questions, even a few wide eyes as I shared a recent case where our predictive algorithm shaved hours off a critical medical shipment. By the end, a hospital director asked how soon we could run a pilot for his network. My knees wobbled, but my smile was real. After the applause faded, our team spilled into the lobby, grinning like kids on a snow day. Devin produced a bottle of cheap wine from his backpack. Maya grabbed takeout pizza from the vendor down the block. We toasted with plastic cups in a corner by the revolving door, our badges clinking and our laughter echoing in the marble-floored hall. Alicia snapped a photo of us under the hotel's enormous holiday wreath, her caption already written, "Best team. Real change." For a moment, I let myself feel the fullness of it, the weight and warmth of doing something that mattered. By the time I got to my car, the city was buried in a fresh layer of snow, every rooftop shining under street lights. I brushed off the windshield with my arm, humming a carol from childhood. I'd added a new lanyard to my growing collection, draped across the rearview mirror, Boston Healthcare Logistics Summit, 2020. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. Christmas at the Carter house came 2 days later, an affair as carefully choreographed as any corporate event. Lights glimmered on every window, the tree glittered with glass ornaments from family vacations. Mom orchestrated the kitchen, Dad played holiday classics on the old stereo, and Lauren hovered nearby, phone in hand, half her attention on work emails. I brought the news of our conference win and new hospital partnerships to the table, sliding a photo of the team across to Dad. He peered at it over his glasses, nodded, and said, "That's impressive, but startups are risky, Olivia. Be careful. Make sure you're saving enough. Maybe take on something safer, consulting, maybe." Lauren barely looked up from her phone. "Did you see my boss on TV last night?" She crushed that debate. Trending all over Twitter. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Mom offered me a slice of cranberry pie, the same recipe as always. I remembered the little girl me, writing "build something important" on the back of a napkin and tucking it under my plate for Santa. The words were still true, even if the audience was different. Sometimes the things that matter most don't fit neatly under a tree. That evening, as snow fell outside, I sat by the window and scrolled through photos from the conference, the badge, the audience, our tiny celebration. My family's praise was measured, cautious, always circled by advice to be safe. There was a time when that stung more, when I thought if I could just build something big enough, loud enough, important enough, I'd finally earn a seat at the Carter table. But looking at my own reflection in the window, surrounded by my lanyards and code, I understood, some doors only open when you stop waiting for someone else to invite you in. Alicia texted later that night, "Let's make them notice by not needing them at all." I stared at the message, the truth of it settling over me like the fresh snow outside, quiet, clean, and full of promise. Maybe it was time to start a new kind of list. I gathered up my conference lanyards and draped them over the back of my chair, a small reminder that the world was wider than one dining room. Somewhere, in the hush of the falling snow, I let myself feel the tide turning, this time, in a direction all my own. Sometimes the real storms aren't on the weather app, they're at the dinner table. The late fall wind rattled the bare trees outside the Carter estate as I pulled my car into the long driveway, leaves swirling in eddies behind me. Inside, the lights glowed golden through frosted windows, the familiar shape of home cast against a deep blue dusk. My chest tightened with that old mixture of nostalgia and dread. No matter how many milestones I stacked up on my own whiteboard, now scrawled with deadlines, pilot programs, and in the corner, Alicia's favorite line, "Trust yourself first," I knew I'd always walk into these family dinners as the girl who hadn't followed the script. The house was full of Sunday sounds, a crackling fire, silverware clinking as Mom set the table, and Clara's warm laughter echoing down the hallway. She'd arrived early from the city, arms full of gifts and stories, her scarf as bright as ever. Andrew was already here, phone in hand, still wearing his tailored suit from work, not a crease out of place. Lauren, recently back from DC, placed a miniature Capitol building on the mantle, a souvenir she'd picked up, she said, for inspiration. Dinner began with talk of legacies and milestones. Dad launched in first, his voice firm and practiced. Andrew, I saw the announcement about your firm's merger. That's a Carter achievement if I've ever seen one. Andrew offered a tight, modest smile. We're growing fast. Just signed our 5th partner. Dad beamed with approval, and Mom squeezed Andrew's shoulder before shifting to Lauren. And Lauren, your work on the Hill. Margaret and I can't stop bragging to our friends. Those photos of you at the rally, remarkable. I folded my napkin, quietly doodling circles in the margin. My mind drifted to work. Another rollout was going live next week, and a new hospital pilot meant the teen would be running late nights. For a moment, I let myself feel proud, thinking about the whiteboard at the office and the milestones we'd already hit this year. But as conversation circled the table, my name remained at the edge. Finally, Dad turned to me. Olivia, you must be busy with all your projects, he said, the word projects heavy with ambiguity. We've been talking to the family's advisors about the estate planning. There are some decisions to be made about the trust, future allocations, roles, the usual. Your work is, well, it's hard to evaluate for these purposes. A lot of moving parts, you know? Not quite as straightforward as a partnership agreement or a federal appointment. I forced a smile, tracing the rim of my water glass. I suppose it isn't, I replied, careful not to let my voice tremble. Andrew smoothed a non-existent wrinkle in his jacket, clearly satisfied to have his own box checked. Lauren set her Capitol building just so, then caught my eye. What you do is interesting, Liv, but it's hard to explain to people. If you ever want help rebranding or, making it more tangible, I could connect you with some folks in my network. I thanked her, knowing the offer was genuine, even if the undertone was clear. I wasn't quite there yet. Mom tried to soften things, slicing the roast chicken as she spoke. We just want to make sure everyone is on solid footing, dear. Stability matters, especially now. I nodded, the old echo of her favorite phrase ringing in my head. Stability is the key to respect. The room filled with the warmth of food and fire, but I felt the cold edge of distance. Aunt Clara watched it all quietly, her gaze steady. As the meal wound down and conversation faded into talk of holiday plans, she leaned over. Liv, sometimes the best rules to break are the ones everyone else thinks are set in stone. I didn't paint my first mural until I was 50. You've got time, and your own way. Her hand squeezed mine under the table, an anchor in choppy water. Dad cleared his throat. We'll revisit your share when things are more settled. For now, stability matters. He said it with the finality of a judge reading a verdict, and the conversation moved on. My stomach twisted, not with anger, but with the familiar ache of being quietly sidelined. Dinner wrapped up with pie and small talk. Andrew showed off pictures from his firm's new offices, Lauren recapped her DC trip, Mom adjusted the napkins just so. I checked my phone under the table, only half listening. There, glowing in the dark, was a message that made my heart leap. A major VC wanted to set up a call about Series B funding. I tried not to smile too broadly. In the background, Andrew's voice droned on about contracts. Lauren waved a scarf she'd picked up at Union Station. I traced absent-minded doodles on my napkin, each loop an unspoken promise to myself. Sometimes storms aren't in the sky, they're in the spaces between sentences, in the quiet after the roast has been carved, in the weight of a family name. As I slipped on my coat, Aunt Clara hugged me tight and whispered, "Trust yourself, Liv. You're further along than you think." I walked into the cold night, phone buzzing in my pocket, a storm brewing, this time, with my name on it. No one can ignore a thunderclap, especially when it happens at their table. That winter, the city of Boston glinted with fresh snow and holiday lights, but I barely noticed. My head was full of numbers, contracts, and a truth I'd been carrying alone. SwiftRoute had just closed its Series B funding at a $100 million valuation. I should have been shouting it from rooftops, but instead, I sat at my desk in our new headquarters, staring at the blinking cursor of an unread Forbes email. Congratulations, Olivia. We'd love to feature you in our upcoming 30 Under 30 issue. My hand shook as I read it again, part disbelief, part anticipation. Alicia barged into my office, grinning so wide I thought her face might split. You know what this means, right? She said, spinning my chair around. Pretty soon, they'll call you for advice. Her voice echoed the old joke we'd shared in the warehouse days, when our wildest hope was just enough server space for the week. Maya and Devon popped their heads in, holding up a cheap bottle of champagne and plastic cups. One toast, Maya insisted. Then back to work. Hospital contracts got to go out by midnight. We huddled in the break room, fairy lights tangled above the fridge, a whiteboard jammed with milestones and half-erased encouragements. The numbers on that board felt suddenly real, the kind you couldn't ignore even if you tried. Alicia raised her cup. To not waiting for permission. We clinked plastic, and for a moment, I let myself believe that all those years in the shadows had been worth it. But there was no time to celebrate. The Carter family's annual holiday dinner loomed, and I knew what was expected: smiles, polite updates, no talk of risk or revenue. I pressed my luck, letting the news sit on my tongue, half wondering if this time I'd finally say it out loud. Instead, I packed my suitcase, ironed my plainest dress, and let the Forbes email sit unread. The Carter estate sparkled with its usual December finery. The tree in the foyer glimmered with silver and gold, the dining room decked in holly and candles. Andrew was already recounting a recent court victory, gesturing with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place at the table. Lauren, radiant in a new suit, described her latest campaign event in D.C., parents hanging on every word. Their accomplishments lined the mantel, next to portraits of ancestors I'd never met, stern faces with names that echoed in Boston's history. Dinner began with the usual toasts. Dad stood, champagne glass raised. To Andrew and Lauren, this family's pride and future. May your success always reflect on us. Mom beamed, her hand resting on Dad's arm, eyes shining with satisfaction. I joined the applause, feeling the old familiar distance settle like a shawl across my shoulders. Conversation ebbed and flowed around me, fundraising, legal strategies, capital gossip. I watched the silverware glint in the candlelight, noting how everyone's attention orbited Andrew and Lauren. Their laughter was effortless, their anecdotes rehearsed and well-received. In a lull, Dad turned to me, glass still half-raised. And Olivia? Still chasing dreams? The words were light, but the sting was sharp. For a moment, I considered telling them everything, the funding, the article, the hospital wins. Instead, I smiled. Always, Dad. Some dreams take a little longer. A brief silence followed. Andrew cleared his throat, launching into a story about a recent negotiation. Lauren chimed in with news about a viral video from her boss's campaign. Mom passed the bread basket and smoothed the tablecloth, her way of tidying up loose threads. I studied the ancestral portraits, wondering what those stern men and elegant women would have made of a logistics startup, of a daughter whose victories didn't come with a trophy or a title. My phone buzzed in my lap, a sharp vibration breaking the pattern. Alicia's name flashed on the screen, her insistence cutting through the fog. I slipped away from the table, heart pounding. The conversation in the dining room carried on without me, more stories, more toasts, the kind of pride that's easy to give when you recognize the script. In the hallway, away from the laughter and the polished silver, I answered Alicia's call. "Tell me you're ready to make some noise," she said. Her voice was steady, full of the belief I sometimes borrowed. I glanced back at the closed dining room doors, then out at the snow swirling past the window. "I think it's time," I replied. "Let's be undeniable." As I hung up, the tension in my shoulders eased, just a little. Sometimes, it takes a thunderclap to wake a room. Sometimes, you have to become the storm yourself. I tucked my phone away and returned to the table, letting the warmth of the lights and the hum of family talk wash over me. I wasn't ready to share everything yet. Some victories needed to be savored, held close, before they became just another story for someone else to applaud or dismiss. But as I lifted my glass for the final toast, I knew the tide had shifted. And for the first time, I didn't need anyone at that table to notice. I only needed to keep going. In the Carter house, you weren't supposed to take calls at dinner, unless the call changes everything. The rules of family decorum were as rigid as the silverware placement, and for as long as I could remember, no phones at the table had been enforced with gentle reminders and occasional sharp looks. But on this winter night, as the last flickers of candlelight reflected off the crystal glasses, my phone buzzed insistently in my lap. I hesitated, caught in that split second between expectation and instinct. It flashed me back to being a child, standing frozen by the foyer alarm panel, blinking red after I'd accidentally set off the house security. Back then, the whole family had rushed in, voices raised, alarm bells echoing, every adult in the house demanding an explanation. But this time I was the one being called, and it was my turn to make the family listen. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my chair sliding back across the polished floor. I caught Mom's surprised glance, Dad's faint frown. Aunt Clara raised her eyebrows, and Andrew barely paused his story about firm mergers. Only Lauren noticed the tremor in my hand as I left the table. In the hallway, away from ancestral portraits and the soft clatter of forks, I pressed accept. Alicia's voice crackled through the speaker. "Liv, SoftBank's in. 40 million. Wire confirmed." Her excitement was a jolt of electricity in the calm hush of the house. "Valuations official, 100 million pre-IPO. And listen, there's more. Goldman Sachs wants a press release tonight. Tokyo team says you're a go for Asia launch. Forbes has locked your interview." My hand steadied around the phone, and I felt a smile creep onto my face, one that came from someplace deep, years in the making. "That's fantastic news," I replied, letting each word hang steady and calm, my CEO voice now second nature. "Schedule the team call for the morning, Alicia. Tell Goldman I'll send over my notes tonight." Alicia laughed, that full-bellied, disbelief-turned-joy kind of sound. "The world's about to know, Olivia. I'll handle the press. You enjoy your night, if you can." I stood in the quiet of the Carter hallway, phone still in hand, feeling the echo of Alicia's words. For a moment, I let the reality settle: SoftBank, Goldman, Forbes, Tokyo. The kind of milestones that could fill a lifetime of Christmas cards, if anyone cared to send them. When I returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations had faded. Mom's fork was frozen mid-bite, Dad's champagne glass still lifted in a half-toast. Lauren looked up, mouth slightly open. Even Andrew seemed unsure, glancing between our parents and me. Aunt Clara broke the silence with a ringing laugh. "Now that's worth a real toast," she declared, raising her glass high. The tension snapped, champagne bubbling in uncertain hands, a flurry of glances and forced smiles. My mother recovered first, smoothing her napkin as if by reflex. Olivia, darling, you never told us things were moving so quickly. SoftBank, you say? Is that the SoftBank? Dad leaned forward, eyebrows knit, the lawyer in him kicking in. This is major, Liv. Why didn't you tell us sooner? His tone hovered between pride and something else, a need to reclaim the narrative, to make sense of the shift in family gravity. Andrew sat back, lips pressed tight, as if reordering family hierarchy in real time. Lauren tried to jump in with a question about Tokyo, but I just smiled, feeling for the first time that the script no longer belonged to anyone but me. My voice stayed steady, even as my heart pounded. There wasn't much to tell before now. These things happen fast, or they don't happen at all. But yes, SoftBank's in, we're going international, and I have a Forbes interview Monday. I'll send you the press release if you'd like. A hush lingered, each person at the table recalibrating. Mom's eyes shimmered, torn between pride and the old worry that risk and reward are two sides of a coin she never learned to flip. Dad tried for a smile, but the corners of his mouth betrayed the shock. I let the silence work, it was its own kind of thunderclap. Aunt Clara winked at me, her glass still held high. To Olivia, then. For building her own legacy. We raised our glasses, the sound ringing out clear and true. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, the ancestral portraits watching as the Carter family story quietly, finally, began to rewrite itself. I sipped my champagne, the taste sharp and celebratory, my phone buzzing again in my pocket, another message, another door opening. The night wasn't over, and questions would surely come. But for the first time, I felt rooted in my own success, seen not as the invisible Carter but as someone undeniable. And as Dad leaned in, his question hanging in the air, I realized that sometimes the call that changes everything isn't the one you're waiting for. It's the one you answer, steady and sure, with the whole room listening at last. Sometimes the real inheritance isn't money, it's whose name you put on the door. That thought echoed in my mind as I sat at the Carter dining table, watching my family recalibrate in the wake of last night's thunderclap. The same table where, months earlier, my work had been called a phase, now vibrated with new energy, an eagerness that wasn't lost on me. Dad was the first to lean in, elbows on the polished wood, his voice a notch warmer. Olivia, we should talk about next steps. With my experience, I could advise on the legal structure. You know, help you protect the family's interests as SwiftRoute grows. His words dripped with legacy, but the urgency was new. Lauren jumped in next, her phone already out. You should let us feature your story. I can get you in front of the right people in DC, align SwiftRoute with public policy, get ahead of the next health innovation panel. She looked at me the way people look at a lottery ticket, equal parts admiration and calculation. Andrew, never to be outdone, offered a tight, practiced smile. You know, Liv, if you're looking for family investment, we could put together a package. Leverage the Carter brand. It's good PR for everyone. It would have been almost funny, if it hadn't been so transparent. For years, my startup had been an afterthought, at best a curiosity, at worst an embarrassment. Now, with headlines and millions in backing, I was suddenly a family asset, a story they wanted to claim as their own. I met each pitch with the same calm I'd used in every tough boardroom. It's interesting, I said, folding my hands on the table, no one ever asked about SwiftRoute before. Not really. I spent years at this table, trying to explain what we were building. Most of the time, you changed the subject. I glanced at Andrew. You called it a delivery hobby more than once. Lauren's mouth tightened. Dad shifted, but said nothing. I kept going. SwiftRoute isn't just me. It's Alicia, Maya, Devin, the people who believed before anyone else cared. We worked out of a storage unit. We ate cold pizza and drank vending machine coffee and celebrated when we could pay ourselves minimum wage. We built something important because we saw a problem and decided to solve it. My voice didn't rise, but I saw the effect. The air in the room changed, old confidence draining away, replaced by something more honest, uncertainty. Mom tried to soothe, her tone gentle. Olivia, we only want to help. Family supports family. I shook my head, sadness and relief mixing in my chest. You want to help now that there's something to own. But you weren't part of the story when it was hard, when we were invisible. That's not how this works. I smiled, small and true. You're not part of this story because you never wanted to be, until now. Aunt Clara caught my eye and nodded, her quiet support a thread through the tension. As dinner wound down, I excused myself, phone already buzzing with texts from real partners, the people who'd fought beside me from the start. Andrew tried to stop me at the door, his hand on my arm, but I slid away. There are calls I have to take, I said simply. And they matter more. The night was sharp with winter wind as I stepped outside, my breath clouding in the dark. Behind me, the mansion glowed with soft, familiar light, a place of old stories, and now, an ending. I let the door close, the click final in a way I'd never felt before. In the driveway, I checked my phone, a dozen messages, congratulations, questions, new opportunities. Alicia had emailed a draft of the press release about SoftBank's investment. I read it once, twice, then added a note of my own, a single paragraph at the end, announcing a foundation in Swiftrout's name. A fund for young women in STEM, especially those who'd never been invited to the table, who wanted to build something that mattered even when no one was watching. I pressed send, feeling the glow from my phone, the warmth more real than anything inside the mansion. The inheritance I wanted wasn't a trust or a name in a will. It was a future I could help create, for myself, for my team, for every girl who ever wrote something important on a scrap of paper and dared to dream it true. The wind picked up as I walked to my car, the city lights beckoning in the distance. I didn't look back. The turning point wasn't just a moment in the Carter family story, it was the start of my own. Sometimes you reclaim your legacy by giving it away. Those words had circled my mind in the quiet hours since SoftBank's announcement, like a gentle echo of Mrs. Reed's voice, what you build matters more than what you're given. It felt right, then, that the next chapter for SwiftRoute, and for me, would be about opening doors for the next Olivia, the one still staring at whiteboards and wondering if she belonged. We launched the Brooks Foundation on a clear spring morning. The name, Brooks, was a subtle nod to the family tree that once seemed close to me. But now, the name would mean opportunity. The foundation's mission was simple, to support young women, especially those from underrepresented communities, who wanted to shape the future of logistics, STEM, and all the invisible networks that make the world move. I wanted every girl who looked at a system and saw a better way to know there was a place for her. Alicia and I worked for weeks on the launch, trading emails at midnight, debating logo colors and scholarship criteria over breakfast burritos. Mrs. Reed was our first visitor that morning, walking into the SwiftRoute HQ with a box of pastries and the same gentle pride she'd had back when my inventory app was just a spreadsheet taped to her flower shop wall. "You always had the spark," she said, hugging me tight. "Now you're lighting the whole block." Our first official event wasn't a press conference or a ribbon cutting. Instead, we invited a group of high school girls from a Boston public school to tour our office. Most had never set foot in a tech company, let alone watched a live demo of logistics algorithms at work. They crowded around workstations, eyes wide as Devin showed them how data could move medicine or Maya let them try their hands at optimizing real routes for a food bank run, I kept the tour casual, no speeches, just conversations and questions. Is it always this messy? One girl asked, pointing to the sticky notes on our project board. I grinned. Messy is how you know something real is happening. Alicia led a session on career journeys. Mrs. Reed told her story about switching from teaching to running her own business. For a few hours, the office buzzed with new energy, bright and full of hope. At lunch, we circled up for pizza and lemonade, swapping stories about bad science teachers and the best ways to break out of your comfort zone. At the end of the day, each student left with a tote bag, a notebook, and a tiny keychain shaped like a delivery truck. But the gift that meant the most to me came a week later, when a bundle of thank you cards arrived at our office, hand-drawn, full of color, and each one different. I opened the first card. In purple marker, a girl named Tyra had written, "Thank you for proving a girl like me can run the whole system." My eyes blurred, and I laughed softly, part pride, part relief, part something I'd never put into words. As the foundation gained attention, I received an email from my mother, this time full of warm words and an offer. We'd love to host a fundraiser for the Brooks Foundation at the Carter Estate. It would mean so much to bring everyone together. I sat with that invitation for a long time, weighing kindness against old wounds. In the end, I sent a flower bouquet to the Carter house, a mix of lilies and wildflowers, the same kind Mrs. Reed used to give me, along with a short note, "Thank you for your offer. The foundation already has a home." That evening, as the sun set over Boston, I gathered my team at the old warehouse where it all began. We kept it simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pitcher of sweet tea. Maya brought a chocolate cake, Alicia supplied the jokes, and Mrs. Reed raised her glass, to everyone who ever believed before the rest of the world caught up. There was laughter and the comfortable silence of people who know what it means to build together. At the end of the night, I found myself smiling into a mug Alicia had given me, shipping confidence since 2023. I let my gaze wander around the battered desks, the fading tape marks on the wall, the string lights we never bothered to take down. This was our legacy, woven together from every risk, every long night, every person who saw possibility before it had a price tag. As the team drifted out, I lingered in the doorway, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. I realized I felt lighter than I had in years, not because my family finally understood, but because I'd stopped waiting for their applause. Instead, I'd built something that gave others a place to start, a way to dream out loud. Sometimes, the greatest legacy is the one you pass on, and the freedom to walk your own road, smiling every step of the way. Some names you inherit, others you earn. That truth lingered with me as I sat in my Boston apartment, the city spread out below, windows blinking with stories that were not my own. The air was soft with the hum of boats along the harbor and the distant clang of a late-night streetcar. I'd lived a lifetime in these rooms, moving from borrowed corners to spaces of my own, collecting reminders of a journey that had started with a single stubborn question: what if I built something that mattered, even if no one saw? On the shelf above my desk, I'd tucked away pieces of that journey: my battered MIT mug, the first team photo from the storage unit, a keychain shaped like a delivery truck. But tonight, I slipped one more thing into the corner, a thank you note from a student, written in looping purple ink, right next to the faded letter from the Carter Trust Fund, the one that had said, "Not at this time." A soft laugh escaped me, the contrast felt almost like a benediction. Outside, Boston glittered under a navy sky, the river reflecting 1,000 points of light. I settled onto the window seat, phone buzzing with a steady rhythm of encouragement. Alicia's text was first: "Tomorrow's yours. Knock them out." Maya sent a string of emojis, Devin promised to stream the keynote, and Mrs. Reed wrote, "Proud of you. Always knew you'd change things." Even Aunt Clara called, her voice rich with love and mischief. Make them remember your name, live. But most of all, make yourself proud. I let the words wash over me, a gentle tide rising against the old undertow of expectation. For so long, the Carter legacy had been a weight, something to prove, to chase, to outgrow. Tonight, I realized it was also something I could set down. What mattered wasn't whether my family understood, but that I did. My work, my voice, my story, all of it mine. In the quiet, I prepared for the keynote at the Boston STEM Academy. My nerves pulsed, but not with fear. This time I was ready, not for applause, but for the faces of girls in the front row, the ones who needed to see that someone like them belonged at the center of the story. I reviewed my speech one last time, then closed my laptop, letting gratitude fill the space where anxiety once lived. When morning came, the city glowed with the golden blue of sunrise. I dressed with care, tucking the student's note into my bag as a silent promise. The walk to the auditorium was brisk, the harbor breeze crisp and invigorating. At the doors, staff greeted me with smiles and a bright badge, keynote speaker, Olivia Carter, CEO. Backstage, I took a moment to breathe, eyes closed, hands pressed against my heart. Memories flickered, late nights in the storage unit, cheap pizza with Alicia, Mrs. Reed's flour-dusted advice, the weight of family dinners where my worth was always measured against an invisible scale. I let those memories come, and then, gently, I let them go. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause startled me, not for its volume, but for its honesty. In the first row, I spotted girls clutching notebooks, eyes wide with hope. I spoke for them. I spoke for every kid who ever drew diagrams in the margins, for every outsider who dared to draw their own blueprint. This isn't about who gives you a seat at the table, I told them. It's about building a new table, and opening the door behind you, so someone else can walk through. I watched the room lean in, saw the spark in their faces, and felt the legacy shift from something inherited to something earned. Afterward, my phone pulsed in my hand, a chorus of messages, cheers, and tiny digital confetti. Alicia's was last, let's build the next thing. I smiled, a peace settling in my chest that I'd chased for so long. That night, I stood by my window and watched the boats slide across the harbor, their lights trailing silver on the water. The city was alive with possibility, and for the first time, I wasn't reaching back, I was looking ahead. Some legacies are written in marble, others in ledgers. Mine was written in hope, in code, in the hands I'd held and the doors I'd opened. The name I'd earned, Olivia Carter, CEO, mentor, builder, was enough. More than enough. And as Boston glimmered into the night, I knew my story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning. Looking back on my journey, I realized the true reward was never about applause, but about finding peace in the life and legacy I built for myself. Sometimes, the most important thing we can give the world isn't a family name, but a hand reaching back to lift others up. When we let go of old hurts and choose compassion, we find the strength to open new doors, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. If this story has touched your heart, I hope you'll share a memory or a lesson that's helped you grow. After all, it's in our stories and connections that we find true belonging, at any age.